So I did the research with 450 people, men and women, who were all single, separated, divorced, widowed, Black, white, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, gay, straight, trans. It was a really good comprehensive sample. And what I found, what was interesting, is that if you ever wish to have a healthy, loving, wonderful relationship, and you're not going to find it on speed dating and, in 1 minute, that there are three things that actually have to happen. There are three things that you have to actually learn and that you have to do, not just wish and hope and
Mhm.
fantasize. And these are the three things. Number one, each of us needs to be in a good place ourselves, emotionally, psychologically, psychiatrically. We need to be willing to do some tough work and deal with our issues, typically beginning with our own family of origin, our depression, our anxiety, our early child sexual abuse, our domestic violence. We need to be okay. And as I used to tell my daughter all the time, the relationship needs to be the icing on the cake. We
Okay.
need to be the cake. We need
Mhm.
to have clarity about ourselves, about relationships, about what's okay, or what's not okay. So that's step number one. Now, do most people want to do this, Ron? Absolutely not. No,
Yeah.
they do not. Okay, number two. We talk so much. There's never been so much talk in the media about relationships and communication.
Welcome to 45 Forward, the beginning of the rest of your life. Each week, host Ron Roel and his guests discuss topics of interest to many listeners in their 40s and beyond, including retirement, caring for aging parents, health, lifestyle, and more. It's time to think ahead to the next half of your life, and we'll help you plan it with ease. Now, here is Ron Roel.
Welcome, everyone, to another edition of 45 Forward, where our mission is to help you, our listeners, from Los Angeles to Long Island, make your second half of life even better than the first. In today's conversation, I talk with Beatty Cohan, a nationally recognized psychotherapist and sex therapist who is also an advice columnist, radio host, and author of For Better, For Worse, Forever, Discovering the Path to Lasting Love. So now let's meet my guest, Beatty Cohan. Beatty, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. It's just a pleasure to be with you, Ron.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. Beatty, I've been looking through your stuff, and it's really terrific. And everybody knows there's a lot of talk these days about loneliness. It kind of came about in spades during the pandemic when everyone was isolated. But there's a lot of talk, and a lot of description, but not much prescription. That is, what to do about it. And so that's where you come in, because you've done a lot of work in this area and you have lots of interesting things to say. So, well, we'll get to all of that. But first, I wanted to give our guests a sense of, of you and a little bit of your story. You have an intriguing story for one reason, which is that you've been thinking about what you're doing now for a long time, since you were a kid.
I
So tell us a little bit about that story about
have.
growing up in Winnipeg.
I have, yes, growing up in an Orthodox Jewish home in Winnipeg. And what was really interesting, Ron, my parents, although we were not wealthy, giving was very much a part of my life. I remember my mother at the end of the year, she would be mailing checks to the Red Cross and to various different
Mm.
organizations, whether it was for $5 or $10. And my dad and I, we were very, very close. Of course, he was my tennis coach. I was actually number 10 in Canada as a juniors, but he was
Oh.
my coach in very much in an emotional, societal, political way as well. And I remember in the middle of driving down the cold roads of Winnipeg in the winter, he would stop the car and he would see people on the street that were homeless.
Mm.
And he would give me $1 and he would say, I want you to go up to this person and I want you to give them $1 because he's cold and maybe he can buy a cup of coffee. So that was the environment
Mm.
that I actually grew up in. And then what happened, what was really interesting, I was about 10 years old and it was Hanukkah, which right around Christmas. And my parents, they gave me a white transistor radio, and I can visually still see
Mm.
this little radio. And I used to take it to bed with me and I would listen to music. And I'm not exactly sure how I found this show, but there was a show that aired live at midnight every
Mm.
Sunday night called Ask the Pastor. And it was a call-in counseling radio talk show. And I would listen to it every single Sunday night. As I say, I don't know how I found it. And people would call in about their marriage problems and about all kinds of issues that they were experiencing in life. And Ron, I was mesmerized. And as a little girl, I wanted a call-in counseling radio talk show. Of
Mm.
course, I've hosted many call-in counseling radio talk shows over the years, but that was the beginning, helping people. And for some reason, my little girlfriends, they would approach me and they would ask me questions about boys and sex and things like that. So I was lucky in that I never needed to make a decision about what I was going to do. My challenge was that I was a terrible student. My mom was a teacher, and we were very concerned about my grades. I used to have to go to summer school, and I think the reality was is that I really wasn't interested in history and math and chemistry and physics. But I fortunately was able to graduate from high school, and of course, I did my graduate and postgraduate training at McGill University
Okay.
in Montreal. But it's been an interesting journey, the most interesting
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
I could imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, so your work intersects a lot of areas, and you
Mhm.
and I have talked about this before. And so the whole issue of relationships is, very current today. And there's lots of advice about it. But as you pointed out, we're really kind of in a crisis stage, and
We
there
are.
are things, so your practice and your speaking and all your work intersects with issues of relationship and sexuality and mental health. Just talk, and you and I talked about how the fact that we talk about these things, but there's very little policy that really addresses the fundamental issues here. So, what have been some of your experiences in just trying to get people at a higher level to get interested in and recognize how much they affect our society?
Well, it's been challenging, of course, to say the least. And even our Surgeon General a couple of years ago has spoken up and has talked about a real loneliness epidemic.
Right.
We have a real mental health epidemic. I mean, we've never seen the kinds of mental health numbers for depression and anxiety, and even amongst our adolescents and our children. I mean, I continue to read articles where I mean our kids are in trouble. I had done some consulting at East Hampton High School in East Hampton, New York, and of course this was post-pandemic, and the disconnect even amongst the kids themselves. I mean, it was really something. They had great difficulty communicating, speaking to each other, with the teachers. And I think that one of the things that I've seen happening, and I have a 16-year-old patient, and I met her a couple of weeks for the first time, and we were talking about social media. And she told me that the average amount of time that her friends spend on various different screens is 11 hours a day. And she
Wow.
says, well, I don't spend 11 hours a day. I said, so how many hours do you spend? She says, I only spend 9 hours a day. It's like, oh, okay, really?
Only nine.
Yeah, only 9. So, looking at selfies and taking selfies, so that there seems to be more and more and more disconnect amongst people, even though, we think, and I think it's a myth that, we are in fact uh connecting. I mean, even in my own practice in New York City, virtually nobody wants to come in anymore. I mean, I have a
Mm.
patient that lives a block away from me on the Upper West Side. She will not come in, Ron. And in East Hampton, I have a very small practice, and of course, it's smaller, so people, they actually do want to
Mm-hmm.
come in. But things have changed. During the pandemic, post-pandemic, we're not back at
Hmm.
all
Yeah. Yeah.
to where we were getting together. In fact, I was looking at singles in-person events in New York City,
Mm-hmm.
and there are almost none.
Wow.
Everybody's on the dating sites. Everybody's on their various different, devices,
Right.
and we're not connecting. We're not
Yeah.
really connecting.
Yeah. And almost every level too. And I find myself in the situation where even with my sons, in our house, um, they'll text me, and I'm like, oh, okay.
Yes.
You can come downstairs and talk to me, but it and we joke about it, but I'm an avid reader of the daily newspaper comics because I find a lot of the comic strips are about interesting relationships and families. So there's one in which I guess a 15 or 16-year-old son is critical of his mother for calling one of his friends or something like that, and he says, "You call without texting first."
Yeah.
Like giving her the heads up you're going to call.
Right.
And it's true that we just have lost it. You've said it. We've lost the art of conversation,
Yeah.
and it's all of our responsibility. It's no one. So I don't want to just blame the next generation because I can see even in my generation, when I used to ride the railroad into the city, in the old days, so to speak, people were sitting there reading their newspaper. Now they're all sitting there looking at their phones. No
Right.
one's ever talking to each other. And I think that's where we are. We have lost the art of conversation.
Well, we have, and people don't even, I don't want to sound, negative, or I don't want to blame anybody, but so many women that I'll talk to, patients and friends, they'll say, well, we don't even get dressed up anymore. We have our meetings in our pajamas. In fact, it was really, really funny. There are two young brothers that I actually treat, and it was the first session, and they were in bed, lying down in their pajamas, and it was a family issue, and it was like, really, really, really. So, but the thing is that, look, I think that people need to kind of just sort of reset
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and take a look at, what's going on, what's working,
Right.
what's not working, and what we need to do to get ourselves on a path so that we can really start to prove the quality of our own lives and the quality of our
Right.
relationships. That's
Right.
the bottom line.
Yes. Okay. So we're going to move along here. We have a lot of things to cover, as I mentioned. I want to just dig in first, since it is, Valentine's month, about your book about For Better, for Worse, Forever, Discover the Path to Lasting Love. And one of the things that you and I have talked about in the past is what you refer to as the bachelorette scam,
Mhm.
which I think is, and there is this certain mythology in our society, and it's not always wrong, but I mean about, love at true, first sight, that type of thing. And interestingly, uh, I'm actually partly involved in hosting a presentation of a documentary film on Long Island. It's been around the country quite a bit, but called the art, the Age of Love, which is
Uh-huh.
about having love later in life. And the interesting premise of the film is actually it's a speed dating event for 70 to 90-year-olds.
Okay.
Um, but it's not, that they're gonna fall in love instantly, from speed dating, but just it was a means of getting these people out just to meet people and understand, like, wait a minute, we're all in this. Let's be authentic about where we are and just talk to people. So it's not the presumption that from this dating event you're going to fall in love with someone, but talk about, so you've done some interesting research and you have some interesting
Yeah.
ideas about this.
Well, I was living in Providence, Rhode Island, and I was in private practice, and I had my radio call and counseling show, and I was with ABC TV, and I was thinking about why we are doing so badly in our relationships. And I
Hmm.
think the audience needs to understand we have a 48 to 50% divorce rate for first marriages, 67% divorce rate for second, and 71 to 72% divorce rate for third marriages, and
Wow.
three women continue, and I've been, citing these same statistics for years, continue to be murdered every single day by their so-called, intimate partner. So I decided that I was going to do some research. I wanted some understanding about what was going on other than my own sort of clinical hypotheses and beliefs. So I did the research with 450 people, men and women, who were all single, separated, divorced, widowed, Black, white, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, gay, straight, trans. It was a really good comprehensive sample. And what I found, what was interesting, is that if you ever wish to have a healthy, loving, wonderful relationship, and you're not going to find it on speed dating and, in 1 minute, that there are three things that actually have to happen. There are three things that you have to actually learn and that you have to do, not just wish and hope and fantasize. And these are the three things. Number one, each of us needs to be in a good place ourselves, emotionally, psychologically, psychiatrically. We need to be willing to do some tough work and deal with our issues, typically beginning with our own family of origin, our depression, our anxiety, our early child sexual abuse, our domestic violence. We need to be okay. And as I used to tell my daughter all the time, the relationship needs to be the icing on the cake. We
Right.
need to be the cake. We need
Mm-hmm.
to have clarity about ourselves, about relationships, about what's okay, or what's not okay. So that's step number one. Now, do most people want to do this, Ron? Absolutely not. No, they do not. Okay, number two. We talk so much. There's never been so much talk in the media about relationships and communication and this and love. And yet I find, and again, I'm not being critical, not blaming anybody, but this is what I have found, through the research and just through practicing for all these years, is that people do not know, they do not have clarity about the ingredients that need to be present in a healthy relationship. And we need clarity. We absolutely need to know. And then number three is my formula. I developed, and I'm a very bottom line person. I have
Mm-hmm.
no patience for psychobabble and for things that don't work. I'm very bottom line. So I developed this 10-step formula. And as you'd mentioned, it teaches people exactly how to assess. And assess is not sexy, it's not lovey, it's not romantic, but it is critical. How to assess who's right for you and who's wrong for you before committing to any serious relationship. We assess everything in our life, our nail polishes, our lipsticks, our cars, our computers, our cell phones. And when we think about relationships, we never think about the importance of assessment. And one of the most depressing things for me after the research, because in my own life, I'm probably one of the most impatient, personally, people who will ever want to meet. And of course, professionally, it's different. The research found that it takes about a year to really find out who somebody is and isn't, and that you absolutely cannot fast forward this process.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to play out the points of the match, and you can't rush. And when you rush, you are going to falter, and there
Mm-hmm.
are going to be a lot of mistakes made. And it was like before I did the research, I would meet somebody and a woman, a man, and I'd say, gee, what a lovely person I've just met.
Mm-hmm.
I would never say anything like that today.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, and I ask patients, so what would I say today? And they say, well, I'm not sure. But what I say is that I've met somebody who appears. They appear
Mm-hmm.
to be lovely and nice and honest and wonderful and terrific, and then I will know who they are in about a year. Now, obviously, if there are a lot of red flags, you're not going to stay in for a year if you
Right.
see there are a lot of issues and a lot of problems. And this formula, it empowers, it educates, and the most important thing of all is that it keeps people safe.
Mm-hmm.
And do people want to use this formula? Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
When the book first came out, my agent and publisher this was going to be a New York Times best-selling book. The book has done okay, but it was not a New York Times best-selling book.
Mm-hmm.
And this process of discovery, it's not fun. And
Mm.
it's not quick. This
Hmm.
is not a quick fix.
Right.
So we continue, unfortunately, to repeat our history
Hmm.
for the most part. And all we need to do is just look at the statistics, which are
Yeah.
very upsetting, very depressing.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. I didn't expect that as you got to second and third marriages that the rates of divorce would go up. So it seems like we're repeating the same patterns and missing the same points. Um, so what do you think people, is it, I'm sure it's a number of things, but what occurs to me is that we're in this culture of rushing and of assumption.
Yeah.
So we want this to work, so we don't ask the questions we need to ask, and we don't look at things we don't want to see. How many times, I'm sure you've heard from people who they marry someone, and then they're like, they were aware of certain things in the other partner, but they never really addressed them, or they thought, well, they'll work out, or I'll fix them. I'll get them to see my point of view. You know.
Right, right. I know I'm often asked, and what do I think are the most important ingredients that really
Yeah.
make relationships? And again, as unromantic is what I'm going to say is it really is emotional communication and problem solving. I mean, the art of conversation, really being able to speak about the most difficult and intimate kinds of issues that will always surface in all relationships. And I think it's a really good thing. I mean, most people want to avoid conflict. And I
Hmm.
think it's really important, when you're dating somebody, when problems surface, not to avoid or deny or blame or project or hit the dog or, eat too much. But you want to find out whether or not you and your partner have the capability, have the skills to be able to work out issues while you are, getting to know each other. It's a very important time, in a relationship, if you're
Hmm.
upset, to be able to express those feelings, and of course to be able to express them well, and then to see how is your partner going to respond. Are they just going to blow you off and blame you? And I don't want to talk about this, but these are such important things that we all need to know about ourselves and about the person who we think that we are madly, in love with.
Right.
And we need to have our eyes open, and we
Hmm.
need to look at issues like substance abuse of various different kinds,
Hmm.
and domestic violence kinds of issues, and verbal abuse and emotional abuse and financial abuse. And I
Hmm.
always start off, and of course you don't want to put somebody on trial,
Hmm.
I always start off, as I do in my practice, about, what was it like growing up in your family? And so often, people will say, well, my mom and dad, they had a terrible marriage, and I don't want to repeat their
Mm.
history. So what I did is that I learned about healthy relationships. I went to therapy. I educated myself because I was so worried that I was going to repeat what
Mm.
happened and didn't happen in my own family life growing up. Now, that is a huge plus. I would love to hear
Hmm.
somebody say that, knowing that they took this seriously, that they did the work, and that they were committed to doing things better and, committed to doing things well. And those are just a couple of, examples.
Hmm.
And, there's a huge difference for, example, between emotional intimacy and sexual intimacy. You can have a great sex life with someone and have no or very little emotional intimacy, the caring and the sharing and the respect. And can I help you? And, I love you. I mean, these are big, big, big differences. And we need to be very, very savvy
Hmm.
in order to be able to make good decisions, to
Right.
to live our life in ways that are in our best interest.
Yeah. Now, I don't want to just generalize too much, but I assume there probably are some gender differences. I mean, between men and women, or males and females. I'm sure there are many exceptions, but I feel like we're at a point now where we are sort of opening up men and to, for lack of a better word, sort of the feminization of men, getting them to open up and say it's okay to be authentic. It's okay to to be, to express our fears or vulnerabilities, um, which I think, in general, we don't. We don't. There's still this notion of masculine independence and self-sufficiency, and I can take care of this, and really lacking on the emotional communication part. Is that your experience?
It's interesting that you say that, because I find that with both sexes
Mm-hmm.
that people have real difficulty getting in touch with their feelings, really knowing what it is that they are feeling, and then subsequently be able to express those feelings and to be able to express them well. I mean, there was a huge article in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking about this on my Ask Beatty show in the Progressive Radio Network. And it was women basically saying there are no good men. So I find myself oftentimes, really defending men. There
Mm-hmm.
are wonderful men, there are wonderful women, but there's this attitude. I mean, I hear this from friends, and I hear this in there are no men, anymore that are worthy of being with,
Mm.
and it's really kind of sad, because all this is doing is it's contributing and promoting the disconnect, between the sexes. And what I have found too is that whether or not you're gay or straight or trans, that the issues, I mean, over and above political issues, of course, what's going on now with Trump, and there shouldn't be any diversity, which is a whole other subject. The relationship issues are the same, whether
Mm-hmm.
or not you're rich or poor. And when I started off after my training at McGill, I started off in the inner city of schools in Montreal. And yes, waiting for the welfare checks and being concerned about, was there going to be sufficient money to put food on the table for your kids? I mean, that's huge. But the actual relationship issues,
Mm-hmm.
there are no differences between the super rich people that I've treated over the years and the inner city group that I began with.
Mm.
The same communication, the same problem solving, the same sexual difficulties, the same emotional intimacy concerns. And we need to do a much, much, much better job with our young people, starting off in the first grade, I believe, teaching kids how to communicate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's talk about that because I think that that's something that uh, we're nervous about. As important as it is, it's like, well, that's not part of the curriculum, you know.
It needs to be.
But yeah. So talk about that need. I know that you were involved I think it was in Florida, and you were involved in. It was a
Yes.
whole range of talking about marriage, but at different levels with different age groups. So talk about that experience.
Well, talking about marriage, and yes, I'm going to talk about my experience with, the former Governor Jeb Bush, but teaching kids at the first grade level to work things out and how can we solve problems. I mean, I can't even imagine how that would be a problem, how that would be an issue. If somebody is angry, to be able to teach them, how can we say it better? Instead of throwing a stone at your friend, maybe there's another way, you can express your emotions and your anger. And I do think that should begin very early. And I know that there are parents who feel that this should not be a part of the school curriculum, but I strongly disagree. What was really interesting in Florida, I lived in Sarasota, Florida for a number of years, and I had an SBD segment 2, 3 times a week on ABC TV in Tampa.
Mm-hmm.
And one day I get a phone call from Governor Jeb Bush, of course, who I had never met. His daughter was having problems. Everybody knew about the issues that she was having. And I suppose that maybe his aide saw my segment. So Governor Bush appointed me to the Florida State Commission on Marriage and Family Support Initiative, specifically so that my program, my relationship education program based on the research and the books, that was going to be implemented into high schools and colleges throughout the state of Florida.
Mm.
So what did I know? I'm very excited. I was, never involved in a political sort of world before. And I had an opportunity for 2 years. I met every single decision maker in the state of Florida. From one part of Florida to the other part of Florida, I'd be flying around. And what was really, really, really disappointing, Ron, was that there was nobody at all, including Jeb Bush. I think his wife cared. I remember giving his wife,
Hmm.
I was at their house and I gave, her a couple copies of the book. There was nobody that cared at all about relationship education, about my program, about the book, about helping kids in this really important world of relationship education.
Right.
The guidance counselors cared, the teachers, they cared, and there was nobody else that cared in any way, shape, or form. And that was my 2-year experience
Hmm.
as Commissioner Beatty Cohan, and
Yeah.
it was like, wow, okay.
Right. Yeah, and I think the interesting thing is it's not a partisan thing. It's just it is a political thing. People are they don't want to get involved in these
Uh-uh.
critical life skills that
No,
people need.
and then wonder why. And then I met with the head of education from the state of Florida, state of New York. So when I moved to New York City, and I continue pursuing, remember I'm a, former tennis champion. So I'm used to just getting back in the game and
Right.
you never kind of give up. So I had lunch with this woman who was the head of the, Department of Education, and we had, long conversations. And the bottom line was is that she didn't care at all either.
Mm.
So I'm looking for partners, at
Hmm.
that level who care. And even in the private schools here, even in the public school system here in New York, there is tremendous, tremendous resistance in the churches, in the synagogues.
Mm.
And you want to understand, is there some, and I'm hardly a conspiracy type thinking person, but you wonder, is there some secondary gain for all these people that we don't do well, that relationships continue to suffer because there is so much that we can do,
Right.
to help people to never make a mistake in love again.
Yeah. I think some of it is cultural in that we assume that there's been this thing. Well, that's the space of the family. In other words, these are conversations you have
Right,
within your
right,
family.
right, right.
And of course, they don't happen. That's the problem.
Not
I'm not
happen.
saying they never happen, but and it's a tremendous burden on parents, and there's no reason why it should be just on parents. This is a societal issue. The
Right,
relationships cross into all sorts of areas. So it's not just that it's it's not like teaching sex education. I mean there are arguments there, but there are also very good reasons. And I didn't have an experience in this particular area, but I was involved in trying some years ago, working with some colleagues and trying to um, create a curriculum for financial literacy,
mhm,
in
mhm.
schools. And there was modest success, but again, it was like, well, I don't know. There's no room in the curriculum. There are test scores to deal with.
Right.
There's every, and some of them are. I get it. There are metrics that people need to meet, but that, that doesn't help move us forward. And someone has got to step up and be courageous and say, no, this is what's important.
Exactly. I mean, I'm looking right now at some teenage dating violence statistics, which I really want your audience to hear.
Okay.
Nearly 1 in 11 females and approximately 1 in 14 male high school students report having experienced physical dating violence in the last year.
Hmm.
About 1 in 8 females and 1 in 26 male high school students report having experienced sexual dating of various different kinds, violence. The reported rates of physical dating violence for college students range, and this is a really upsetting statistic, from 20% to 45%.
Wow.
1 in 3 girls in the United States is a victim of physical, emotional, or verbal abuse from a dating partner. So these are
Hmm.
young people. And only 33% of teens who were in an abusive relationship ever told anyone. And this is a really, really interesting statistic. 81% of parents believe that teen dating violence is not an issue.
Hmm.
Okay. So here we have it. We have the numbers. We are seeing in black and white what it is that's going on. And what do you do
Mm-hmm.
when you have people who can really make a difference? It would have made a difference had Jeb Bush cared enough
Mm-hmm.
to make sure, and all of his appointees had cared enough to implement the program, but they didn't care.
Mm. No, so there is a lot of talk about, you just mentioned the dating violence, and then there's a lot of things about domestic violence.
Yes,
Now, and you've been active in there just trying to stop
very.
domestic violence. Yeah.
Yes,
So what?
before it starts.
Right, right.
Which is the same thing. I mean, my Stop Domestic Violence Before It Starts, Never Make a Mistake and Love Again program is based on the three things. You got to get yourself together. You got to learn the ingredients that go into a healthy relationship, and you need to use the formula to assess before the violence starts, because there are always signs. If we don't know what to look for and we
Mm-hmm.
don't feel confident to confront, and
Mm-hmm.
if we're used to being beaten up emotionally or physically or sexually, it can start to feel very familiar. And familiar may feel familiar, but
Mm-hmm.
familiar may be terrible and self-destructive and destructive. But if we don't have the clarity,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to get ourselves into big trouble, and we are getting ourselves into big trouble.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Let's go back a little bit too. Wonder if you could talk a little bit more about what are some of the ingredients of the healthy relationships.
I mean, communication
Okay.
and problem solving
Right.
and the emotional intimacy, the caring and the sharing and the respect. And I want the best for you, and I want to work things out. And the art of conversation, where we got to be able to discuss and make compromises and trade-offs. The goal being in a loving, healthy, wonderful relationship is to come up with a win-win resolution. Not
Mm-hmm.
like our president is talking about, where it's win-lose, where there are
Mm-hmm.
winners and losers in a healthy relationship. If there are winners and losers, the relationship it's going to be one big loss. So these are the kinds of things where people are knowledgeable enough to talk about their goals and their hopes and their dreams and their interests and what's okay and what's not okay. And to be able to have real conversations. I mean, if we're looking at sex as an example, and unfortunately, this is another area. I mean, people are having less sex today than in previous years. Young people, it's
Mm-hmm.
really interesting, to talk to younger people about this. Of course, we're so busy with our devices, and of course, if the view is, and you happen to be heterosexual, that there are no good men, then
Mm-hmm.
you're sort of left, to your vibrators, to satisfy yourself. But for example, there was a study done, a Pittsburgh Western psychiatric study done, where these were couples who described their marriages, they were married, as happy or very happy. So here are interesting statistics. 50% of the women had difficulty becoming aroused. 46% of the women said they had difficulty experiencing orgasm. 15% weren't able to reach orgasm under any circumstances. With the men, 10% of the men talked about having difficulty, achieving and maintaining an erection. And with older men, that is much, much, much more of an issue than this
Mm-hmm.
10%. And the thing is that if we're not able to talk about all of this, if we're not in a good place, if we're feeling depressed, we're not exactly going to feel like jumping into bed and having sex. If our relationship is not in a good place, and we're angry, and we're just so disconnected, for the majority, certainly of women, that is not something we are going to want to do. Then the side effects, Ron, there are so many sexual side effects of a variety of different prescription medications,
Mm-hmm.
including, high blood pressure medications and heart medications and drugs for diabetes, and the list goes, and psychiatric medications. And we need to be able to talk about this with our doctors, and our doctors need to be able to talk about this with us. I mean, in all the years, there's never been a doctor that's ever asked me, how's your sex life? It's never come up.
Mm-hmm.
So, we as the patients, we need to be savvy consumers. And if we're having issues, we need to talk about them with our partner. We need to talk about them with our doctor. medical problems that affect our sex lives, hormones and menopause, and the list goes, on and on and on. And yet, because people are afraid and reluctant to bring up tough subjects,
Mm-hmm.
we sort of give ourselves and we give our partners a pass, and it will always come back to haunt us.
Mm.
So, we need to be able to find the ways and find the skills and to be able to deal honestly and openly with whatever it is that's coming up, in our own lives and also in our relationships. And this is hard. This
Yeah.
is not easy to do.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I'm going to mention it again at the end of the show, but before we get there, I want to mention, in case people missed at the end, some information about you, like how people can find you, your website, your what's on your website, how people can reach you, how people can listen to your programs, your podcasts. So just tell us a little bit about that before we get
Okay,
move
well,
on.
my website is beattycohan.com, and there's probably way too much on the website. There are videos and radio shows and TV shows and bios, but that is actually the best way. All my contact information is there. And of course, the Ask Beatty show airs live on the Progressive Radio Network every Monday afternoon from 3 to 4. And I'm going into my 13th year, Ron. I can't
Wow.
even believe that I've done all these, shows here on this particular network. And my Ask Beatty column in Dan's papers is in the Hamptons and New York and Palm Beach editions. And I write two Ask Beatty columns every month.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I have, my private practice in New York City and
Right.
also in East Hampton. I think of all the things I do. I mean, I love doing this and I love doing TV and I love writing, but there is nothing quite like sitting with people
Mm-hmm.
in my office. And hopefully they're going to be coming in more and not just, seeing me on Zoom, and sitting with people who are in a state of crisis when they first arrive and going through the process with them when things start to really get better. And
Right.
when you think that there's no way that these problems are ever going to be resolved. And with hard work and a good coach, it's really amazing,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
what can happen.
Yeah, let's broaden the discussion a little bit with because I know that one of the areas, in addition to marriage and relationships in that capacity, is with fractured families. The issues
Yeah.
of estrangement, which
Yes.
happens more than we'd like to admit, but in terms of often adult children being estranged from their families. So talk about that a bit.
Well, this is a really upsetting statistic. One in four adult children in this country happen to be estranged from their parents.
Hmm.
Uh, I've never seen this kind of number before. Now, clearly, Ron, there are situations where, there needs to be no contact. I mean, if the relationships are
Right.
abusive and that there has been no way or desire to work things out. And, my philosophy that a little bit of poison is poison, and I have a zero toxicity policy, across the board. I get it, but in fact, I wrote a column on estrangement for Dan's papers, and I've never received as many emails from
Hmm.
parents. And I saw a number of these families where they weren't even really sure, what the final event was, where their kids didn't want to have any contact. And what I really encourage parents to do is to continue to try to reach out. In fact, I reached out to the adult children of three families, and one woman, she actually came in. It was a very complicated situation, and she was willing actually to engage with her parents if I was going to be there. And that was something that we actually did.
Mm-hmm.
In another situation where the adult children were physically violent with the parents. And this happened to be a family from Europe. There was a lot of money involved in the issue. the presenting problem was money, although it was clearly much more than money.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the adult children, they actually beat up their father, but the parents, and I had offered to reach out to the sons and talk and see what their perspective was on all of this and see if we could get together and try to work things out. The parents were so afraid for me to call and to change the dynamic of their relationship that they, at this point, I've not heard back. And they said, well, if we ever, have the courage to make a change, we'll let you know. I've yet to hear. The third situation, I contacted the son and he threatened to sue me. Yes. How dare you contact? And I left this loving, loving, loving email saying, I'd met with your mom and dad, and they want nothing more than to work things out. They love
Hmm.
you. They miss you. They miss your kids. And, I'm in New York and you're here in New York, and let's get together and maybe we can find a solution. And he left me. It was a very, very frightening phone call.
Mm.
So, but having said that, I think that, in situations like this, we need to try and do our very best to at least try to engage and have
Hmm.
the conversations. And, obviously in these very difficult situations, it's probably best to do it with a trained professional who can help facilitate the conversations. But as I say, this 1 in 4 number is very, very frightening. And there are a lot of therapists. I call it a cult of American therapists. I mean, not all, but many
Hmm. Hmm.
who are encouraging this cutoff without going through the process of let's try to acknowledge, address, and resolve as best as we can, even though we
Right.
can't change history, the problems that have gotten in the way of our life and relationships. I mean, I'm all about problem solving and communication. But as I say, there is a huge wave of mental health therapists. There was a
Hmm.
big, big story in the New York Times months and months and months ago. And I spoke with the writer, where cutoff seems to be the prescription. Always a mistake, or I would say almost always a mistake.
Hmm. Yeah, I always find it kind of surprising. Not every family has issues,
Right?
but when I talk to someone and we just happen to get in conversation about uh, a, a brother or a sister or mother, and they say, "Well, I haven't talked to them in years." I'm like, "Really?"
Yeah,
Um, Again, not that our relationships are perfect, but I, I couldn't imagine just not talking to my brothers for years, just cutting them off.
yeah,
And it's just like, well, I'm not going to get into your family, but um, why? What is the cause of this? But you need to, it takes almost, as a, mental archaeology, right? You got to excavate what's happened to these people, and what is it that has caused such pain in their
right.
relationship that they can't address these issues. Um,
Well, what was interesting with this one situation when the daughter did come in, I met with the
hmm.
parents a couple times, and the daughter came in. The issue was she alleged early child sexual abuse.
Hmm.
She alleged that her father sexually abused her.
Right.
I have dealt with, I can't tell you how many hundreds and hundreds of early child sexual abuse situations. And she was very clear, Ron, about all of this. And I met with the parents twice before I met with her, twice after I met with her. And the father and she also accused the mother of knowing and doing nothing. The parents absolutely categorically refuted that anything had happened at all. And it was clearly, it was a he said, she
She's.
said
Hmm.
kind of thing. And the parents were heartbroken about all of this, but they made it very clear they were not going to acknowledge and admit to something that they believe never ever happened. And, my position was, I believe both.
Oh.
It was a very yes. And sitting with this woman and having sat with, hundreds of people who have been sexually abused, I had no question that something happened. But then there was something very interesting that was introduced in the conversation with the daughter. She had started using psychedelics. And apparently, This came out during one of her psychedelic trips.
Hmm.
Now, there's a lot of controversy about psychedelics, the pros, the cons, what it can do to help depression, to help deal with some of the early, traumas. But the daughter said she would come back if her parents agreed that something happened, and they would not agree. So I haven't seen either the parents or the daughter again. That was the end of that.
Wow. Well, in the last few minutes we have, I just wanted to go back to your notion of win-lose, because I think that, yeah, certainly there is an edge to that today, but I have to say, it's not just this current presidency.
Right.
This, in my coverage of politics has been my objection to the way we look at these issues, which is win-lose, and
Yes.
we are complicit in that dynamic.
Yes.
Um, and so I don't know how to break through that. I mean, other than to, put our leaders through consensus and collaboration courses, or
Yeah.
put them in a room and force them to come up with solutions, and or you can't get out.
Yeah.
But do you have any thoughts about how? Because I think there is, a connection between our larger issues and our personal, interpersonal issues.
I agree with you completely. And, my husband, who's a sociologist, we have these discussions constantly. And he's an activist, progressive, and we talk about, what's going on politically around the world. And, my view is we have to care to want to work it out. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the desire to let's see if we can collaborate and come out with win-win resolution. I mean, that needs to be the primary goal. But what happens? He'll say to me, these days, well, see, your win-win thing is not working. And it's not working because there are so many factions and so many people and so many governments where that's not their mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we then do? Well, maybe we continue to try to just do our due diligence and try and get people to see that it's better to come together and maybe lose a little bit of dignity or a little bit of ego than destroy each other in war, whether it's personal war or whether or not it's political war. But yeah, the caring to for us to be together in a better way. I mean, it's so frustrating to see how many people don't seem to care and don't seem to want to even really consider that kind of a mindset. But I think we have to keep trying though.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm with you. I really do. It's hard, I understand that there are some situations when we have elections and someone wins and loses, but there are just so many situations where the issue is getting beyond certain political cycles and saying, no, this is a problem that we have to keep at it. And I do think, we have to find some champions, people who say, well, I'm not going to do that. I mean, we have some people like, our Martin Luther Kings and
Yes.
but that we
Yeah.
lionize and appropriately so, although we forget the history that that was not so when King was actually active and people
Right.
got really upset at him when he went beyond,
Right.
advocating for nonviolence when he was talking
Yes.
about the Vietnam War. It's like, oh, stay in your
Right.
lane. So
Right.
it's difficult. It does take some courage and persistence. And so I'm glad you're in this space. And so we just have a few minutes left. I want to again, because I know people, it takes a couple times for them to record. Like, okay, if they want to reach you, it's Beatty, and make sure they have the spelling right. It's not Betty. It's Beatty
No, it's
Cohen.
BEATTYCOHAN.com. And all the contact information is there. And then people can really get a sense of, what I think and what I do about a lot of different issues.
Right.
And
And you've got the Ask Beatty show on the Progressive Radio Network. How do
yes,
people find that network? Do they just go online and find it, or?
yes, and it is live every Monday afternoon from 3 to 4 p.m. So if they just do, if they Google Ask Beatty, all kinds of things pop, pop up. That's kind of been my tagline for
Right.
for a long, long time.
Right.
And by the way, Ron, I really want to thank you. This has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation.
Well, it's been a real pleasure, and I just want to mention, author to author, that, again, your book. Where can they find your book? On Amazon, I assume.
Yes, the book is on Amazon, For Better, for Worse, Forever, Discover the Path to Lasting Love. And even though we can't control today what's going on in the White House or what's going on in other parts of the world, we can take control of what's going on in our life.
Right.
And we can, in our assessment, of relationships, we can make sure before we commit to any serious relationship, whether or not, ourselves and our partner are capable of effective, constructive, emotional communication and problem solving so that there won't be any surprises.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. That's not always an easy conversation. Like, uh, in my book called The Caregiving Navigator, which is about family caregivers, one of the beginnings of each chapter talks about the family conversation, about the
Yeah,
importance of communication. And one of the things I emphasize is that these will not be easy conversations.
no,
You've got to raise, have the courage to have them and persist through them.
right.
So that is the key,
Right.
communication.
And
Right.
avoiding all these issues that will not make these issues disappear. What's going to happen is that the issues are going to, they're just going to get bigger and bigger until one day there is going to be a major explosion.
Right. Right.
So let's deal in the beginning as best as we possibly can. And as I say to people all the time, we don't need to navigate the ups and downs of life on our own. And that sometimes the very best thing that we can do is reach out and get some good professional help.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, folks. Well, that will wrap it up for today. I want to thank Beatty again for a terrific conversation. You can listen to the conversation too as a podcast on Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio. Be sure to join me next week when I'll be talking with Dorian Stern. She's a veteran nonprofit executive who will talk about Canine Companions, which is a nationwide provider of remarkable, highly trained service dogs to adults, children, veterans, and at no cost to the recipients. So then, folks, until then, keep moving forward, 45 forward.
All right, perfect. Excellent job today. Good show. We are clear.
Okay, Matt. Great. Okay.
All right, thank you. Yep. You both have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Matt. Okay.
Thanks. Bye.
Well, that went by fast.
Doesn't it? Yeah. So I'm
It
like,
does. It always does. Yes.
yeah, I know. That's why I was like, no breaks. Forget it. We don't need no stinking breaks.
No, I don't take any breaks. The hour just goes. In fact, my show is ending right now. I had them play last week's show.
Okay. Okay. All right, B. So I'll send you well, you have it, the show, but I'll send you the link if people want to listen to it.
Great.
on,
I'll
on
send it out.
Yep, on Voice America /Libsyn is the new platform. So, but I'll give you the link and they can find it. So that's great.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. And let's keep in touch, okay?
Yeah, let's do that. Okay. So
For sure.
yeah, it'll take me the next month or so to sort of figure out my transition, but
Okay.
even before that, we should start, again, the secret for me is, as you said, there are like a million podcasts. So how do we get differentiate ourselves? And that's going to be through our marketing. So
Right.
that's what I'm working on. So I want to get, schedule ahead of time so we can really plan it out, and say, all right,
Good.
this show, we're going to talk about this. We're going to go back and talk about this, et cetera. So let's do that. And let's get together,
No, absolutely. Well, listen, I hope you got what you wanted.
I did. I did. I did.
Good. Okay, so
All right.
we'll see each other soon. Okay.
Okay. Very
Bye.
good. Bye-bye
Bye.
now.
Bye. Bye. Bye.